The S26 Ultra is official. And if you're yawning, I don't blame you. The reactions are already rolling in, and it's the usual mess. Half the internet is screaming that Samsung has lost the plot because it looks exactly like the S25, and the other half is trying to convince you this is some masterclass in refinement. I'm not here to sell you either of those narratives. I'm looking at the spec sheet, and then I'm looking at the physics, and frankly, some of the math here makes me nervous. Because this isn't just refinement. This looks like Samsung is terrified of making a mistake. Let's start with the body. Thinner, lighter, corners are actually rounded. Finally, if you've been using an Ultra since the S22 days, you know the drill, sharp corners digging into your palm like a weapon. So ergonomically, sure, this is a fix. But you have to ask how they did it. They cut the weight and the thickness, but they kept the battery size the same. That doesn't happen by magic. That happens by internal restructuring, which usually means shrinking the motherboard or, and this is what worries me, shaving down the cooling system. We saw this a few years ago with the iPhone. You thin out the chassis, you lose thermal mass. Heat has nowhere to go, and that brings us directly to the engine room. Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen5. Global. No Exynos split this year. Thank God. If you're in Europe or parts of Asia, you can finally stop playing the silicon lottery. You're getting the same chip as the US market. That's the good news. The bad news? This chip is a beast, and beasts run hot. So do the math with me. You have a significantly more powerful chip, possibly running at higher clock speeds if Samsung does their usual for Galaxy overclocking gimmick. You have a thinner chassis with potentially less vapor chamber surface area, and you're pushing a 6.9-inch panel. Unless Samsung has pulled off some wizardry with graphite sheets or the new chip is insanely power efficient, we might be looking at a phone that throttles hard after 20 minutes of gaming. Benchmarks will look great, obviously. They always do. But I don't care about a Geekbench score running in a freezer. I care about whether my frame rates tank when I'm outside in 90-degree weather. We won't know that until we get units in hand, but the physics of thinner phone, hotter chip is a red flag you shouldn't ignore. Now, the cameras. This is where the marketing team is going to try to trick you. They're going to shout 200 megapixels again. Ignore that. The sensor resolution hasn't changed. Who cares? The real story, the one they're whispering, is the aperture. The main sensor and the periscope lens are wider. In plain English, bigger hole, more light. This matters way more than pixel count. Photography is just capturing light. If you can get more photons onto the sensor physically, you don't have to rely on aggressive noise reduction algorithms to clean up the mess. The last few generations of Galaxy phones have had this processed, artificial look. You know what I mean? Grass looks neon, skies look fake, and faces get smoothed out like plastic. A wider aperture means natural depth of field. It means real bokeh, not that software-generated portrait mode junk that cuts off your ears. If, and it's a big if, Samsung dials back the processing and lets the optics do the work, this could be the most natural-looking camera they've ever made. But given their track record of over-sharpening everything, I'm skeptical. I'll believe it when I see a raw file. Then there's the power situation. 5,000 milliamp hours. Again, this is where I get annoyed. We are seeing Chinese competitors, Honor, OnePlus, Xiaomi, stuffing 5,500 or even 6,000 milliamp hours silicon carbon batteries into phones that are thinner than this. Samsung is stuck on 5,000. Why? Supply chain conservatism. It's cheaper and safer to use the same old lithium-ion density we've had for 5 years than to invest in newer, denser battery tech at this scale. They did bump the charging to 60W, up from 45W. It's fine. It's not the 100W charging you get elsewhere, but honestly, once you pass 60W, the diminishing returns hit hard anyway. I'm more interested in the efficiency. If the Gen 5 chip actually manages idle drain better than the Gen 4, that 5,000 milliamp hours might feel like 5,500. But if that chip is inefficient and the screen is bright, you're going to feel that stagnation in capacity. Speaking of the screen, 6.9 inches, 120 Hz. Same old, same old. No 144 Hz. No wild new LTPO tech mention yet. It's a safe panel. Probably the best panel on the market, because Samsung Display makes everyone else's panels anyway, but don't expect your eyes to melt. It's maintenance mode. So, what are we actually looking at here? If you have an S25 Ultra, this phone is a waste of your money. Put your wallet away. The Aperture change isn't worth $1,000 or whatever they're going to charge. But if you're sitting there with an S22 Ultra or an S23 Ultra, the math changes. You're getting 3 years of processor jumps, a genuinely better shape for your hand, and finally getting rid of that curved screen edge nonsense if you're still on the older models. That's a valid upgrade. The S26 Ultra isn't trying to be exciting. It's trying to be the Toyota Camry of flagships. Boring, reliable, holds its value, and does everything good enough. Samsung is betting that you don't want a foldable that breaks or a camera that requires a manual to use. They think you want stability. Maybe they're right. But charging flagship prices for stability, while your competitors are innovating on battery chemistry and cooling tech, that's a risky game to play in 2026. I'm going to wait for the thermal tests. If this thing doesn't overheat, it's a solid buy for upgraders. If it throttles, it's a hard pass. I'll have the thermal gun on it as soon as it lands. Drop a comment if you think the thinner body is worth the battery risk, or if you'd rather have a brick that lasts 3 days. Don't forget to sub so you don't miss the stress test. Catch you in the next one.